This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about trading Bitcoin, taxes, and when to sell Bitcoin. I should say from the outset that none of this is financial advice or tax advice, so be sure to consult a financial advisor or tax advisor before taking any actions. We're going to build this around this meme. Neo saying, "What are you trying to tell me? That I can trade my Bitcoin for millions someday?" And then Morpheus saying, "No, Neo, I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to." So let's begin with the idea of trading Bitcoin and why I am against it. Here's the argument. Let's say that I bought a Bitcoin at $20,000 a couple months ago. In a year or so, I decide to sell it at $100,000. I wait a year and a day, so I get charged the long-term capital gains rate, which is for anything held more than a year. From $20,000 up to $100,000, that's $80,000 in profits. Again, it's taxed at the long-term capital gains rate in the U.S. And so for higher, there are different brackets. There's the 15% bracket and the 20% bracket. For higher brackets, it will be 20% on the long-term cap gains, plus the Obamacare tax, the surcharge. I live in Colorado, so there's a state income tax. So if I'm doing the math right, it comes to approximately a little more than 28% long-term cap gains tax on my $80,000 in profits. So I'm paying $22,000, $23,000 in taxes. And so after doing this trade, sort of a long-term trade, holding for a year, this will be, if you're holding for a shorter time period, you're going to be taxed probably at a higher rate at your ordinary income rate. So I'm trying to do the most favorable version here to show you that it still doesn't make sense. After I pay taxes, I take profits at $100,000 on Bitcoin. I pay my taxes. I'm left, so I paid $22,000 in taxes. I'm left with $77,000 total. And so let's think of what happens now. I need Bitcoin to fall down from $100,000 down to $77,000 just so I can buy back my one Bitcoin. Is it worth the trouble? What if Bitcoin sells off from $100,000, just goes down to $80,000 and then heads back up to $150,000? Then I've missed out on everything. And this is the problem with getting out of Bitcoin, is it's a little bit like housing. If you sell your house, especially if you're in a hot market, you might never be able to get back in again. The same is true for Bitcoin. Does this make sense to do in a retirement account, a tax-deferred account like an IRA, Roth IRA, where you actually pay taxes before, then you don't pay taxes on your profits? I don't think it makes sense, simply because I don't think anyone can time the tops and bottoms in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin does what I think it's going to do, it's going to go up 100x from here, 200x from here. And there's no way, at least in my opinion, that you'll be able to trade in and out of it and make returns like 100x or 200x. This is why I have this rule for things that I think are going to go up a lot, or where there are very high transaction costs and you have to pay taxes before you get back in. But it's mostly for things that you think are going to go up a lot. It doesn't make sense to trade them. I do enjoy trading momentum stocks. None of these stocks do I think are going to go up 10x to 200x like I think could happen with Bitcoin. That being said, there are stocks like Apple and Amazon over the last 20 years that you almost certainly did better by just buying and holding rather than trading in and out. And these tend to be the stocks that benefit from network effects in the same way that Bitcoin benefits from network effects. So this is the argument against trading Bitcoin. One, it's very difficult to get in and out. It's very volatile. It's very difficult to know where the peaks and valleys are. And if you mess up at all, you end up with a big tax bill, and you also end up possibly missing out on a lot of upside. So that's the argument against that. So let's say we've decided to just buy and hold or buy and hodl our Bitcoin instead of trading it. When should we sell? What's the price target? Well, I'm going to argue here that you should never sell, especially if you're a Bitcoin true believer like I am. I'm going to repurpose this Warren Buffett quote. He's obviously talking about stocks. The best time to buy is whenever you have money. The best time to sell is never. And I think this is a profound saying. I think it's never been more true than for something like Bitcoin. You could say it's true for something like Coke, which Buffett owns in Berkshire Hathaway. Coke has sort of seen better days. It might make sense to actually sell that and move the capital into something else. Obviously, there's a huge deferred tax bill. This is one reason that Buffett likes holding for the long term, because he gets to defer that capital gains tax. And if he never sells, he never pays it. What I'm going to argue with Bitcoin, though, is that it's even better than something like Coca-Cola stock. Companies, corporations can always issue more shares of stock, but Bitcoin is truly scarce. It's like Picasso paintings. There'll never be any more true Picasso paintings. Those ended when he passed on. Same with California, Hawaii. Beach real estate, there's just so much beach real estate. And so there's this scarcity premium that gets built into scarce assets. If you think about it, what if your grandparents owned a Picasso, or if your grandparents owned Hawaii, California, beach real estate? My grandfather actually used to own the Boston Celtics. He sold it. He bought it at something like $3 million and flipped it at $4 million. You can only imagine if he had held on to that. So people get too clever with this. They try to time the buying and selling of things. Here's an example of California beach real estate. This is an old article from 1989 from the LA Times talking about how expensive Malibu had become, that it was now $678,000 for a house in Malibu, talking about how bad the traffic was and the natural disasters, etc. Still seems like it turned out to be a pretty good investment simply because it's highly limited real estate stock. The median price of a house in Malibu is now $3.4 million. So this is an example of a scarce asset that you should never sell if you can. If your grandparents owned a Malibu house and they flipped it and sold it for $678,000 in 1989, they looked like geniuses then, and today you wish that they had held on to it. The same goes for obviously rare art, like a Picasso painting. Here's one of his most famous ones that sold for $179 million in 2015, and that was up from just $32 million in 1997. Obviously, if you sold this Picasso, a single painting, for $32 million in 1997, you probably thought you were selling at the peak. Maybe you just needed the money for something else, but it turns out that was just a disastrous thing to do because it just keeps going up, especially as the US dollar is being devalued. If you're enjoying this video and finding it helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the like button as well. So there can be various reasons to sell your Bitcoin. Are you selling your Bitcoin to put the US dollars that you'll get from it into a US bank savings account? If so, I don't think this makes sense. The true rate of inflation, if you look at something like the Chapwood Index, this is done by metro areas. We can see that it's really around 11, 12% annual inflation. The CPI is a fudged number, as I've talked about in many of my videos. Anyone who actually has bills and pays their bills knows that the cost of living goes up by a lot more than 1 or 2% a year. It actually is going up by double digits. So it doesn't make any sense to sell your Bitcoin if you're going to put it into a savings account where it's going to earn probably less than 1%. At the same time, everything that you want to buy is going up by 10 or 12% every year. So at that point, you're actually not even keeping up with inflation. So that selling your Bitcoin just to stick it in a savings account and be super conservative doesn't make sense to me, at least. Are you selling your Bitcoin to pay medical bills, some family emergency, because you're going to starve, you're going to be homeless, you're going to have to be living out of your car? Obviously, probably makes some sense to sell Bitcoin if this is your situation. Are you selling some Bitcoin to send a kid to college? And again, we're not really talking about selling Bitcoin today. The real temptation will come when Bitcoin hits $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million per Bitcoin. And I think those numbers are coming in the next 4 to 8 years. Are you selling your Bitcoin to send a kid to college? Doesn't make sense to me. College has changed a lot since I went to college. It's become much more ideological. It's become much more expensive. And we also have something called the internet, which allows any motivated, ambitious individual to really learn anything they want. If you don't want to learn from YouTube videos, you can always hire a mentor. Many of these colleges are now charging tuition from $30,000 to $50,000 a year, even more for some schools. That pays for some pretty good tutoring time, even with a very expensive mentor. Why not just have, if it's the right sort of student, the right kind of kid, have them learn everything online for free and just give them the Bitcoin instead, rather than selling it and giving it to pay some college administrators inflated salaries. because a lot of the cost of cost increase, tuition increases in colleges and universities have really gone to the administrators. It hasn't really trickled down to the teachers, which makes it even worse, all this middle management. Are you selling your Bitcoin to start a business? If so, it's one thing if it's just a lifestyle business, you enjoy doing something and that's how you want to spend your life. But if you're doing it to increase your net worth, you have to ask yourself, will your business have a higher return on investment than just holding your Bitcoin would? You have to pay taxes, as we talked about, after you sell your Bitcoin, and so you'll end up with a lot less money post-tax, and then you have to decide whether the business itself is going to have a higher ROI than if you had just kept that equivalent amount of US dollars in Bitcoin. Are you selling your Bitcoin to buy a depreciating asset, something that goes down in value every year, like most cars? Obviously, rare cars do not. Most cars that you want to drive around, though, lose their value, a little bit of value every year, especially the first couple years. If you're selling your Bitcoin to buy a Lambo or something like this, not a good investment decision. Might be a good lifestyle decision. No judgment there. But these are some possibilities why someone might want to sell their Bitcoin. Again, you have to consider the fact that if you want to keep up with cost of living increases and you want your children and grandchildren to be able to do this, you can't sell your Bitcoin and put it in something that goes up at a lower rate than Bitcoin itself. This is one reason that Bitcoin is eating the whole world and is appreciating against all other asset prices. Now let's take a look at what a lot of wealthy people do, especially with their stock holdings. There were all these stories from a year ago about how Musk has borrowed against his shares of stock. This is something that Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and really everyone does. Here's an example where Musk was borrowing. Basically, he posts his Tesla shares as collateral. He doesn't sell them. He just gives them to a bank or broker. The broker issues him a loan that's collateralized against the value of those shares. In this case, Musk can borrow 25% of the value of the shares. So if he posts shares that are worth $100 million, he can take out a loan of $25 million, pays a very low interest rate, I would imagine, especially in this low interest rate environment. And in this way, wealthy people like Musk and Gates are able to use their money without having to sell their stock, pay taxes on it, figure out a place to put that capital. If you're Elon Musk and you're still running the company and you're in your prime, it probably makes sense to just keep investing in yourself, keep your money in Tesla, as opposed to, well, he should probably put some in Bitcoin as well. But this is what wealthy people do. This is a way of avoiding taxes. It's a legal way of avoiding taxes as well. The only thing you need to be able to do in this case is to make those monthly interest payments on the loan that's collateralized by your shares of stock or by your Bitcoin. Again, if you never sell your Bitcoin, you'll never owe taxes on it. So you consider, instead of selling your Bitcoin at some point, I'm not talking now, but when Bitcoin's maybe at $500,000 or $1 million, and you want to actually have the use of the value that's built up in Bitcoin, you can consider taking out a loan against it, like Musk does against his Tesla shares. So let's think about how this works. You put up one Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin has hit $1 million per Bitcoin. You own one Bitcoin. So you put it up as collateral, hopefully in the kind of account where there's some multi-signature solution and you share one of the keys. You're not giving up your private keys. These solutions will get better and better as time progresses. But let's say you found a safe place where you can post your Bitcoin as collateral. You can take out a loan at the same, let's say you can take out the same sort of loan to value that Musk was doing, 25% of the collateral. So in this case, you could borrow $250,000. Again, you will still maintain ownership of your Bitcoin. You'll get to participate in the upside, but you won't have to sell it and pay taxes. So then you just need to pay the monthly interest payments, and you do those. If you have cash flow from your job or your business, you could pay the monthly interest. You can do the numbers here. If you can borrow it, let's say 3% on $250,000, that would be the annual interest that you need to be able to pay. The other thing you can do is, if you don't have any other sources of cash, is you could sell off tiny amounts of Bitcoin to pay the interest on this loan. So in that case, you could actually be completely retired. You're giving up upside by selling these small amounts of Bitcoin. But if you think about it, 3% of $250,000 in terms of Bitcoin is a very small amount, rather than just selling your whole Bitcoin and missing out on the upside. So in this way, you get to use your Bitcoin. You get to use it to either invest in a new business, maybe buy a piece of real estate, maybe buy some consumption item, while maintaining your ability to profit from future price appreciation. If you pay, let's say there's a much higher interest rate right now, you can do this at Unchained Capital, and their interest rates are more, they're around, I want to say they're around 10%. I'm going to do a separate video actually on the actual mechanics of doing this through Unchained Capital. But let's just say that you have to pay a much higher interest rate. You have to pay 10% a year on your loan. That's sort of where the rates are now. But as long as you think your collateral is going to go up by at least 10% per year, you're doing well. You may even be able to deduct the interest payments, depending how these things sort of end up getting characterized by the IRS, how cryptocurrency collateralized loans end up being treated by the IRS. But either way, even if you're paying a 10 or 15% interest rate, as long as your Bitcoin's going up by that, you're still staying ahead, as long as you can continue to make those monthly interest payments. A lot of people have been asking me, what if you just want current income? Well, one way to do that, the simplest way, is when Bitcoin's at $1 million or wherever, you just sell off a little bit, a little fraction of it every year to pay for your expenses. So maybe you sell off 1% or 2%, something like this. If you don't want to sell any Bitcoin and have the tax liabilities associated with that and missing out on future upside, what you can do is you can put up your Bitcoin as collateral, take out that loan we're talking about, maybe the $250,000 loan, and then you can use that to buy some cash generating asset. You could put it in dividend stocks, which probably aren't the best bet at this point, or you could put in some sort of real estate, either apartment complex or commercial office property. Obviously, you have to be careful with more and more people working from home. You don't want to buy a totally impaired asset, but you could buy a couple houses that you could then rent out and use that to generate income. You would use some of that income to pay your Bitcoin loan to Unchained Capital, for example, and you'd use some of it, the rest, to cover your living expenses. And so this will work as long as your net rental yield on your property, if you're buying a real estate property, either commercial or residential, if that yield number is higher than the interest rate on your Bitcoin loan. So this is a way that you can maintain your upside exposure to Bitcoin, because you haven't sold your Bitcoin. You'll still make money as it goes up. In this way, you'll also have upside exposure on your real estate property, and you'll have current income. All of this without having to pay any capital gains taxes on your Bitcoin. I will go into this a little bit more when we talk about Unchained Capital. They, if I read this correctly, they suggest that Bitcoin, using it for a collateralized loan, it's basically going to be characterized as property by the IRS, and as such should not trigger capital gains taxes, as we've been saying. I can go through the mechanics of this a little bit more in a later video, exactly how you do this. I think it's still very premature to do it now. You don't want to do it when Bitcoin's at 30,000 and in a year from now it's at 100,000. You can always do that. You could borrow more money against your Bitcoin as the collateral goes up. But I think it makes, at least for me, it makes sense to wait. Finally, would you sell your Bitcoin at $1 million? This is always the question. We've talked about the tax reasons not to, but I think there's a political reason as well. So when Bitcoin hits $1 million, and I say when because I really believe this is going to happen, certainly by 2028, probably a lot sooner. At that point, the total market cap of Bitcoin will be worth 21 trillion. I'm just taking 21 million coins times $1 million per Bitcoin. Hopefully I'm doing the math right. Current M2 money supply in the US is 19 trillion. Obviously the money supply is going to go up a lot over the coming years, but this just goes to show that when Bitcoin hits $1 million per Bitcoin, the total market cap is going to be comparable to a major currency, in this case the world reserve currency, which is the US dollar. And so asking, would you sell your Bitcoin at $1 million per Bitcoin, is a little bit like asking at what price you'd sell your US dollars. At $1 million per Bitcoin, Bitcoin is as big as any global currency, almost certainly, or it's in the top 4 or the top 5. So it's a little bit like asking at what price you would sell your money to get money. Obviously, you want to get out of US dollars and all fiat currencies like euros and yen and Australian dollars, Canadian dollars. All of these are sinking ships that go down a little bit every year. They may even go down a lot more when you look at the Chapwood index for inflation in terms of purchasing power. But this is basically when Bitcoin hits $1 million per Bitcoin, Bitcoin will be money in all caps, capitalized money. Another thought that I've often talked about in videos is that if you out-hodl, if you outlast a government wherever you live, you will not have to pay taxes to that government. This was a great strategy in the latter days of the Roman Empire. When it was crumbling, you didn't really have to pay your taxes because the government was going to be sacked by the Visigoths in just a few years. Something similar could happen. The U.S. is definitely an empire in decline. And so maybe you won't be able to out-hodl the U.S. government, but your children and grandchildren might be. Now, we never know. Something much more hostile might replace the U.S. government. It might be the Chinese Communist Party or something like that. But this is just to give you, to sort of get your brain thinking in terms of the big picture, that if you out-hodl a government, you don't owe taxes to it. Another thing that could happen, especially as the treatment of cryptocurrency becomes more and more friendly in the U.S., at some point, especially when you have more and more senators and congressmen who are, and regulators as well, who are Bitcoiners, they could definitely change the law to make Bitcoin treated less like property and more like a currency. And in this case, if Bitcoin is decided to be a currency overnight, you'd just be able to spend it. You would never owe capital gains taxes. Right now, if you spend Bitcoin and you spend it at a price higher than you paid for it, you actually have to pay a capital gains tax whenever you spend it in the U.S. And this is a very onerous regulation. It's another reason not to ever spend your Bitcoin. But at some point, Bitcoin may just be treated like a currency. And in that case, you would not have to pay any taxes. And it would have been sort of a similar effect to taking out a loan against it, where you'd never have to sell your Bitcoin, and it'd be a way of avoiding taxes. The other thing that can happen is if you happen to be living in a jurisdiction that becomes very anti-Bitcoin at some point and tries to persecute Bitcoiners and seize their wealth, you can always leave. It's very easy to cross a border with Bitcoin if you can just memorize 12 words, keep them in your head. You can go anywhere. Obviously, to leave the U.S. legally and not end up in jail at some point, you have to go through this exit tax procedure where you basically pay capital gains tax on all your appreciated securities, etc. And that can be pretty messy and complicated. But that's something to keep in mind, that there will be friendly jurisdictions that are friendly to Bitcoiners. And so if parts of Europe or the US or whatever country you're in happens to become hostile to Bitcoin, another thing you can do is just leave. And in this way, this is one way that Bitcoin wins, simply because no one wants to drive their Bitcoiners to another country, especially as Bitcoiners become more and more wealthy and powerful. They will act to influence the laws, and they will also have a lot more, be able to exert a lot more pressure on tax lobbyists and other government lobbyists. Here's the M2 money stock, as we can see, about 19 trillion. So when Bitcoin gets to $1 million per Bitcoin, it's definitely going to be above, where the U.S. money supply is right now. So this is what we mean by this meme. Basically, once Bitcoin hits 1 million, you may not need to sell it. It's basically a global reserve asset at that point. I think that's one reason this meme is so profound. If you want to learn more about Bitcoin and you're new to all this, I would suggest that you check out my Beginner's Guide to Bitcoin. Just $2.99 today. I believe starting tomorrow or the next day, for a few days, it's going to be free on Amazon. So if you wait, you'll be able to pick up a free copy as well. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.